This week, Tony Kirtley, Senior Incident Response Consultant at SecureWorks, joins us for our feature interview. In the news, Komodo launches a new free service. RiskIQ tries to help people with the GDPR problem. ForcePoint's focus on human-centric security. SecureWorks partners with a security automation and orchestration company. Cloudflare gets mobile, and 10 steps to stop lateral movement. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. The teleprompter now has artificial intelligence, Doug, and updates itself. It's awesome. This week, and talk about them as it relates to enterprise security. You're going to do great. we're gonna
I think that people think that you and I talk like every day at night. You know, It's like, hey, what are you doing? It's kind of a bit of an exhausting week, and I think that we noticed that a little bit in the stories for this week as well.
LogRhythm's Netmon Freemium delivers real-time network visibility to quickly identify emerging threats in your IT environment. Netmon Freemium is a free commercial-grade network forensics and traffic analytics solution. You can use Netmon Freemium's powerful capabilities to search against all observed network traffic, identify abnormal traffic patterns and application usage, and quickly analyze full packet captures. Take the first step towards real-time network visibility. Visit logRhythm.com/freemium to learn more and download it today. Are you worried about PCI compliance? Does your development team understand or care about security? Are you ready to face a breach of your customer's sensitive data? See the worst that can happen before it does. Black Hills Information Security can help you help management see the future. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com to find out how a web application penetration test can mitigate the risk before you go live. Welcome, everyone, to episode number 69 for Enterprise Security Weekly for November. It is not the 8th. It is the 15th, 2017. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, joined by none other than Mr. John Strand. John, welcome to the show.
Sorry, I've been gone for quite a while, everybody. It's good to be back.
It's funny when you and I do talk, because we actually did talk outside of the show.
We did.
We're like
twice.
We're making these huge changes, and we're both like, yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yep, that's what I was thinking too. All right, we're off to the races.
It's the Samisen fridge paradox, right? We both got the exact same fridge without talking to each other.
That's right.
And by the way, how is your fridge working? Mine is still working fantastic.
Mine is terrible. The Android tablet that's built into it is absolutely atrocious. I can't get. I had to. Did you find the secret compartment with the USB?
Yeah,
port?
way up top on the right-hand door.
And the on-off switch. So I realized I could, flip it on and off without unplugging my fridge, because I need to do that because it was just black and not responding. Black screen, not responding.
Step. And I would root it and put real Android on it, but it actually controls the temperature of the fridge, so I'm a little bit nervous to actually do that.
I'm glad yours is working.
It's working really well.
So, quick announcement. That's what I wanted to do. Sorry, I was at the Sands Hackfest the past couple days and not doing shows. So now I get back in the studio and I forget what I'm supposed to be doing. IT Pro TV, make sure you go to itpro.tv/enterprise security. Use the code ES30. Try it free for 7 days. Get 30% off your monthly membership for the lifetime of your subscription. Make sure you sign up for their team solution when you get a supervisor portal. That way, you can do stuff like go to SANS conferences and learn a bunch of stuff. When you get back in the office, you can go find training modules that complement what you maybe didn't learn or started to hear about at SANS. I've certainly done that. I talked to a lot of people when I was at SANS Hackfest, and, kind of have a laundry list of things that I want to research and look into. And having a training resource that's always there to do that doesn't require me to travel or really get immersed. I can go kind of pick and choose and do it on my own timeline. Love that. Love our fine friends at itpro.tv. All righty. Tony Kirtley is here with us today. He has extensive experience in information security in the U.S. Army and private industry, including leadership positions in cybersecurity, security consulting, and global security service management. Tony, welcome to the program. Oh, Tony.
He's gone?
Tony, come back to us, Tony. Tony does a lot of incident response. He's a senior incident response consultant with SecureWorks and helps organizations with incident response, which coincidentally enough is a topic that our listeners really want to hear about. And one of our newer employees, Darwin, saw him speak at a conference, I want to say, and said he's got to come on the show. And let me tell you, Darwin, I mean, not to set the bar too high for poor Darwin or our listeners' view of Darwin, but he's been knocking it out of the park with his recommendations for guests. So he has earned the rights and privileges to say, I think we should have this person on the show. I'm like, all right, I trust you now because of your track. Yeah, he's got a good track record. So
guy's fantastic presenter, but his Skype skills are wanting.
Well, yeah, that could be.
Although it is all honesty, Skype works fantastic right up to the point that it doesn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, how many times have we seen that, right?
Constantly.
So, in any case, did you just see pictures of me on social media? Because I wore an orange shirt again today.
It was an amazing shirt. This one isn't, the one that you're wearing today isn't that bad.
It's not.
The other one was very bright.
Very bright.
Very bright. The lights did you no favors at all.
No, the lights made it glow. I think it's not as bright as it looks like in the photographs, but you know.
So what were some of the presentations that you saw? I heard that Tom Liston just crushed it, as he always does.
It was interesting, John. You know, we were at a pen test hack fest, like the summit is for talk about penetration testing. And largely the themes from the presenters, pretty much myself included, were not so much about the nitty-gritty pen testing details, and there were some talks about that as well. But the ones that I really enjoyed and I think kind of set the tone for the entire summit were surrounding how we get better at our process, how we get better at communicating results, how we get better at our careers, how we get better at time management, all of which are very important things for a penetration tester. So I'd like to see that maturity really work its way into the conference. And it was a nice balance of talks that talked about basically how to manage your career and your time and your communication skills better, coupled with some really good technical presentations. And for that reason, including all the wonderful people that were there, it was a huge success in my opinion and a great show. And I'm glad I had the opportunity to attend and present. And we did Hacker Trivia, which will be, releasing soon. Those videos will be available, and they're hilarious because folks like Tom Liston sat down and did trivia with me. So.
Oh, dang. Paul, we've got a good one. I went to the BitGlass website.
Yes.
And I got their little
chat thing.
Bushan Haynes. It pops up and it says, hey, what would you like to know about BitGlass? So it looks like we get to do a live chat with one of their people while we're talking about their product today.
That's
so
awesome.
I'm going to get that queued up.
Okay. You do that. I'm going to reintroduce Tony Kirtley, who dropped off right as I was introducing you, Tony. Welcome back.
Thank you.
So, Tony, describe what you do for organizations today in your role at SecureWorks.
Okay, so I'm an incident response consultant with SecureWorks, and my focus is helping clients prepare for cybersecurity incidents. Most of that includes developing and reviewing plans and planning and facilitating tabletop and functional exercises. So those two things are about 90% of what I do, and the rest is just kind of gap analyses and things like that go along with it.
What's the top thing that you find either missing or incredibly challenging in enterprises and incident response programs?
With regards to their plans in particular, I find that most organizations don't clearly outline roles and responsibilities. And that's extremely important when especially when you've got a lot of stakeholders in incident response. If it's not clear to them what is going to be expected of them in a certain type of incident, then and agreed upon ahead of time, it makes it very difficult when you do have an incident to make sure that things are carried out in an efficient manner. So roles and responsibilities are commonly left out of the incident response plan.
I couldn't agree more. When I was at working for a university developing an incident response program, what would end up happening was if you didn't define those roles and responsibilities, you needed someone to do something. And they were like, well, why do I have to do that? And then you'd spend a lot of time and have meetings while the incident was happening, explaining to them, like, I really need you to go, do this, get this piece of information and report back on it so that we can roll that up for the stakeholders and have the whole process. And that was like, Where it would just like fall right down and fall off was, like you said, if you don't define that. So what can we do to better communicate to our other teams? Because I think it's one of the more challenging things we have to do. So I have to tell another team, hey, I need you, like when we have an incident, you might have to stop what you're doing and go do this thing. How do I convince them and get them on board?
Well, my experience is different than yours, Paul, because my experience comes from large enterprises in corporate America, and mostly in the manufacturing area. And depending on the culture there, depending on how many incidents they experience, they may be more receptive and more quick to jump on board than at, say, a university. But so I've never had a problem getting people to help out when I need them to. I think the challenge lies in making sure that not only do the stakeholders agree to the responsibilities ahead of time, but are they capable of carrying them out?
Yeah.
And defining them and making sure everyone's got agreement is essential, and not only making sure they can be done, but making sure that there's no overlap in responsibilities or gaps, even worse.
Fantastic points. Tony, for those listening that may not know what a tabletop incident response exercise is or may not have done one, can you describe what that is and what the value that you get from it?
Absolutely. This is my favorite part of my job. I mean, tabletops are what brings to life the incident response plan, because we get to, as facilitators, develop scenarios that, are important to the company, what keeps you up at night, and bring people together to walk through the scenarios and ask them, how would you respond in this situation? So basically, a tabletop exercise is just that, where a facilitator will develop a scenario with the help of some internal stakeholders and present it to the group. Mine usually run about 4 hours in duration, a regular tabletop exercise. I break the scenario up into injects, present those injects, and explore different parts of the incident response process. For example, the first inject will be about the discovery of the incident, the detection, and we talk about, the triage, how you mobilize resources, who do you communicate to, and how do you assess the severity, business impact, and all of those things. And then ratchet the scenario up as you go along, and hopefully the team responds accordingly with ratcheting up the severity level, et cetera, and all the things that go along with that. So it's basically people talking. I have questions that I ask after each inject, and just to kind of spur the discussion. And so I like my clients to do most of the talking in these things. I'm just there to get them to talk, kind of like a karaoke host, right? Sing the first song. So, and then at the end, I always have a debrief with the participants to see how they think they did, how ready they think they are to respond to an incident of that type. And, I always learn something from it too. Someone will make a suggestion sometimes on how we can make the tabletop better. So that's basically how they work. And I've done them from anywhere from 2 hours, which is very short and very hard to dig in depth into an incident, all the way up to 6 hours. So, but typically they're about 4 hours in duration.
And I think the carefully planning out your injects are one of the keys to success, right? Because injects, you're either adding something in or taking something away. And planning that, I believe, is really one of the crucial elements to having a successful tabletop exercise. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And, in order to plan the injects properly, you need to know, I always establish this on my first call with my clients, what are your objectives for the tabletop exercise? I mean, what do you hope to achieve from it? The first one I did with SecureWorks, one of the objectives is to show management that we don't really have a plan. We're broken. We need help. And they didn't have a plan. There was no plan to exercise, but they wanted to kind of stumble through it and learn what they could, and show management that, hey, this is important. This could really happen in our environment, and we need to be prepared for it. So setting objectives is critical, and I can't effectively plan a tabletop exercise without setting those objectives. So, and I always ask go ahead, Paul.
No, I was just going to say it is also difficult whenever you're talking with customers and trying to do tabletop exercises to try to focus them on something that matters. Because a lot of times they'll say, well, we're really worried about the Apache Struts vulnerability because that's what got Equifax. So we want an incident response for that. And then you have to spend a tremendous amount of time training them into understanding that that isn't the specific thing you're defending against. It's just the thing that's in the news. But that particular type of thing could happen in multiple different ways. So how do you handle that type of communication with your customers whenever there's a tremendous amount of education that oftentimes has to go into this as well?
Well, part of the discussion and initial discussion planning a tabletop is what kind of incident would you like to exercise? And a vulnerability is not one of those things. That might be the attack vector, but there's a lot more to it than that. I have had a lot of requests, and truthfully, it's about half and half. And over the past couple of years, the types of scenarios that I get requested are data breach, as you can imagine, and ransomware. And then lately, since NotPetya and WannaCry, clients have asked for those types of scenarios as well. So the first tabletops a client might do with us, they want to exercise their technical team first, and they want to keep it small, keep the stakeholder group small. And so we might go with a ransomware, something that's more technical in nature. And then later on, or for an organization that has done a few and they want to exercise their extended stakeholder teams, the non-technical teams, then we'll do a data breach, which explores some legal issues, some communications issues, et cetera, and gets those people involved.
Yeah, so Tony, based on the incident type, you determine who should be involved. And I know that one of the big questions I get is, when and how should I involve my legal team in my incident response process and tabletop?
Yeah, absolutely. What you're exercising will determine the audience, and legal is one of your stakeholders that is going to be critical in a lot of different incident types, especially data breaches. And that gets fleshed out a lot in these types of exercises when legal should be involved, because I'll ask the incident responders early on, hey, do you call legal? Do you engage legal? And sometimes they look at their plans and say, well, I'm only classifying this as a medium or low so far, knowing what we know at this point. And so says here in my plan, I don't get legal involved yet, which is great. I love it when they do that, because they're leveraging their plans, and that's what they've decided. And that's not for me to say if that's right or wrong. But once legal is engaged, they're a critical component when their compliance obligations or contractual obligations that come into play. So they're a key player.
How do you add in or evaluate their classification of data? What I mean by that is, I try and make organizations aware that they should know where their data lives, put some kind of classification on it in terms of criticality or sensitivity, know who has access to that, and have that mapped out first before you can create an incident response plan, because how do you know what your response is going to be if you haven't classified some of your data? Do you walk people through that, and how does that play into the scenarios?
Well, what I find is most commercial companies, private sector, don't have data classification, and that is the problem. Whether they have an app to a schema is one thing, but if they don't know where that data is, that's a completely different thing. And so it's always a finding when we find that the incident response team has trouble identifying what sensitive data is. The more they know their environment, and I've seen this with a particular client that had a strong IT controls environment where the incident response team had at their fingertips the tools needed to go look up anything they had in their environment. down to the workstation, the user. They had, and this particular client had an internally developed tool that allowed them to do that, and it made it so much easier for the incident response team. So I give a talk called Incident Response Imperatives for the Large Enterprise, and one of them is knowing your environment, knowing where your data is. And that's part of intelligence in my mind. Knowing yourself is as important as knowing your enemy.
The other popular question that I get, I think, is really twofold. They ask, what technology do I need to identify the incident and collect information? Then the other kind of tool set they want is, well, how do I put that somewhere and track it through the system? Sometimes I feel like those are two separate tools. Sometimes they might be a combination of tools that work together. But what do you have in terms of recommendations for evaluating tools that you use in incident response?
Well, I think that this space is really developing. There were some early players. There's some open source and there's some commercial off-the-shelf software. There's some new players that I haven't seen too much of before, that take feeds and from different systems and SIMs and things, and orchestrate and automate some of the SOC tasks that help identify when something bad is happening. Most of the tools that I've worked with have to do with the management of the incident in particular, and there aren't a whole lot of them, just a couple. And one that's been around a while is Request Tracker for IR, RTIR. It's an open source one, and you get what you get with open source, and generally requires a lot more configuration than and customization than a commercial tool. So I've had limited success with that in a role that I've had before. Again, I'm not dogging it at all, but it did take a lot of work to get it the way you want it. And it's at a certain point we found ourselves trying to modify our process to fit the tool, which I don't agree with. I think the tool should fit the process. So I'm excited about the evolution of the tools in this space, and I look for clients that have these tools. I've got one client that uses resilient systems, which used to be CO3 systems, and they use it pretty well. I didn't get deep into it enough to evaluate the tool itself, but I think that some of the key things that you want to look for in tools like this are, one, they need to be private. And if they authenticate to your Active Directory, then you got to be cautious of that, because sometimes the bad guy can compromise credentials in your Active Directory, and so therefore could look at your communications and incident tracking. One thing I've noticed too, that if these are one-off tools that people aren't using all the time, then they need to be able to access them and be familiar with and know how to use them when the time comes to use them. I've often gotten into functional exercises where people have to actually go into their systems, and they have stakeholders that can't access them. They haven't been set up. Maybe they're new to the team, or maybe they just were an oversight, but they need to be accessible.
Yeah, that's one of the. Oh, sorry, Tony. You're actually going exactly where I was going to go, and the next popular question that I get is, we advise people, hey, your incident response tools should be separated from your business processes and your network, because if your network is compromised, well, your tools you're using to manage the incident could be compromised as well, and then you're really in trouble. But there's a management nightmare that's associated. Like, the more you separate your incident response tools and processes and communications, the more of a management nightmare that you have. And how do you balance those two?
Well, it's a tough balance. And, in some respects, you could say you want your incident response tool to be in the cloud, but then when you have integration, or if you have feeds into that tool from some of your internal systems, how do you accomplish that? So it is really a balance. And something that might help is two-factor authentication to that system. But again, that's a setup that people aren't going to use all the time, so you need to make sure that people are familiar with it. And that's where the the tabletop or even functional exercise comes in, or incident response testing of a specific capability, like quarterly, companies should be testing part of their capability, like calling the call tree or the alert roster and making sure you have the correct information on people. One of them might be, hey, can you log into our incident management system? So that could be one of those periodic tests that companies do.
Yeah, I know we end up sometimes with crazy ideas like we're going to set up a ham radio system for communications. I feel like it needs to be tested, right? But it also has to be practical as well, the segregation. And that's not always the same answer for every company, right?
Right, Paul, and I'm a big proponent of using what's in place. And in a lot of large corporations, they may have a crisis management alert notification system like Alert Find or Everbridge or something like that. I'm a big proponent of leveraging those systems. And in a former role, when I was an incident responder, I coordinated with the managers of those systems and to leverage them for, very critical cyber incidents where you can't rely on your primary means of communication. You need this as a backup, because those are always out of band. They're always off your network, and a lot of times they've got, people's home, cell, all that information is already there. So why not plug into that? Just set up different distribution lists for data breach incidents, for example.
Yeah, it's interesting. We do that exercise when we're sometimes in elementary school where, one person will state a word or a phrase, and that'll get passed through multiple people and then end up completely different by the 12th person. And I feel like that happens a lot in incident response. And I think one of the crucial things is making sure your message is consistent and flows through the same people or designated people throughout the system. When I first started incident response, management would come down and ask their individual teams what was happening with the incident, and each team would have pieces of the puzzle, and then everyone was really confused about really what was happening with the incident, what the response should be. Streamlining that communications, in addition to making sure it's not compromised during an incident, I think is also one of the big foundational elements of incident response.
Absolutely. I mean, situational awareness is one thing among your stakeholder groups, internal stakeholder groups. But another thing that relates to the point you just made is what about your communications to external stakeholder groups? Mm-hmm. So if you have a data breach, you've got stakeholder groups like customers, shareholders, the board, all kinds of different external stakeholder groups, regulators. So how is the message coordinated such that it's consistent across the board? Because what you don't want is an inconsistent message or wrong information being put out. So communications teams play a big role in this. Some companies even hire external PR firms to help them manage it. And I think it's very important that legal get involved in these types of discussions too, because what a company says through their official spokespeople needs to be legally sound. And so this is another area where your general counsel and even external counsel needs to get involved and help review the copy, review the messages that are going out to the different stakeholder groups.
Absolutely. Tony, are you giving any upcoming presentations on this subject or other subjects?
I am participating in a marketing roadshow that SecureWorks is putting on in various cities. I have one coming up in Kansas City on December 14th, I believe it is. And in that one, I'm talking about tabletops in particular. And this is a topic, the incident response imperatives talk and the tabletop talk. I've done a webinar. You can find my webinar and tabletops on the SecureWorks website. And every year at our Enterprise Security Summit that we have in the spring for our large clients, I'm presenting something, one of those two. Those are pretty popular topics. So, yep, Kansas City is the next time, and beyond that, I don't have anything on the books.
Awesome. Tony, thank you so much for appearing on Enterprise Security Weekly.
Thanks for the opportunity, Paul.
With that, we'll take a short break, come back, and talk about the Enterprise Security News. Stay tuned. Don't go anywhere.